Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Alright, so today we're going to be painting a Telemon Dreadnought. Now, I didn't bother with the first several steps, painting the gold, washing, dry brushing, all that, because I covered that in the previous video, and there's no sense making you watch the same thing twice. So instead, I'm just going to be focusing on the stuff that's unique to the Telemon. So in this case, starting off with some Mephiston Red, we're going to paint those missiles on that missile rack on top of his head. And yes, the only way you're going to get this done right is to paint each one at a time. There's not that many, and they stick out quite far, so it's relatively easy. But for that first coat, you've got to get in there with the brush and do it by hand. You'll notice once I get that base coat and let it dry a bit, I'll be able to drag the brush across the tips to get that second coat on top and underneath. But you will have to do it one at a time, and it could be worse. If you've ever painted a storm surge for the Tau, that missile launcher is just a nightmare because of how recessed those missile tips are. But anyways, Mephiston Red, if you want, you can add a highlight of like Evil Sun Scarlet or something to make the missiles stand out, or you can paint them in a white to make them really stand out against all the red and the gold. But in this case, I decided just to stick with Mephiston Red. Now at this point I decided to make an executive decision and repaint the shoulder pads with corn red. It's a slightly darker red. I wanted to separate it from the missiles. I didn't want all the red to be the same. These custodian models are already pretty basic in terms of color differences, and so anywhere I can add a little bit of a mixture, I wanted to do that. So I'm repainting the shoulder pads with corn red, because eventually with washes and dry brushes I want to create a nice gradient of a dark deep red up to a lighter one to kind of emphasize that curve on the shoulder pads themselves. So repainted everything, had to give each of the shoulder pads 2 coats, but corn red gives it a little bit of a darker base, and you'll notice there's not a huge difference. If you wanted to stick with the Mephiston Red, you can. This will work just the same. I just wanted to get a bit more of a contrast between the initial base coat and the final highlight. Now, some of the more perceptive of you might notice that I accidentally got a little blob of paint on my finger and I smeared it on top of the carapace weapon. You can see it a lot more there. So it happens. You sometimes get problems. You can see I just noticed it. I'm sure there was a few choice words uttered there. The paint was still pretty wet. So what I do here is just load the paint with water and go after that piece that got on there, get it wet again, and then with my finger was just able to rub it off. The other piece was more dried on, so I had to repaint the gold on top of it. But anyways, it was easily fixed. Okay, so now back to the shoulder pads. Now that the corn red is dry, I'm going to put Carroburg Crimson. You could put on Agrax Earthshade or Nuln Oil if you really want to make it a dark red, but I wanted to maintain that bold red color, and the Earthshade turns it into a dingy kind of red, and the Nuln Oil can sometimes overwhelm the red to it. So Carroburg Crimson or some other kind of red wash makes it darker. Then when I go and do the first layer of dry brushing, that's where I go back to the Mephiston Red. So that nice Mephiston Red with the shaded corn red offers a nice stark contrast. And as you can see there, when I started dry brushing it was a little thicker than I wanted it to be, but I just kept dry brushing, pulling out the color, blending it out a little bit, and eventually got it the effect that I wanted. Now when you're dry brushing, don't go all the way to the top of the gold. First, you'll get red all over your gold armor. But second, you're just wanting the color to get lighter in a smaller and smaller area to reinforce that illusion that the shoulder pad is curved and is only hitting the light on the curved parts. You can start to see here that effect working nicely. Once it's done, just like with before, using the side of a very, very thin brush, we retouch up that gold plating and that gold detail to make it stick out from the red. Once the gold trim is dried off, we're going to use Technical Art Coat to paint up the red on the shoulder pads so that they glisten a little bit, give them more of a metallic look, and again, make them stand out. Because the basic color of the armor is a very bright and shiny gold, in order to make other parts stand out, you have to make them very muted or even shinier. And so a buddy of mine introduced this idea to me of painting the art coat over top to just make the shoulder pads stick out a little bit more. Now, it's okay if you want to paint it right over top of the gold. Since that trim is very small, the extra shine, it's not going to be that noticeable. If you're a bit more of a perfectionist, then do this step before you do the gold trim. But either way, they're going to look pretty much the same. So make sure you thin down the art coat a bit, because if you put it on too thick, it will leave streaks when it dries. So thin it out so it dries smooth in a nice thin layer. Alright, moving on now to highlighting the black cables and joints and all that. So again, I go to my go-to black highlight. So I start with a layer of Eshin Gray. It's a fairly dark gray, but as you can see, it's still light enough to show a little difference. So edges. Initially, you'll probably with the Eshin Gray highlight most of the black edges. Everything. When you go back and do the second layer with the lighter gray, you're just going to hit the highest areas to again create that illusion of depth, and so you can see the highlight a little bit better. So Eshin Gray over everything. Over the gun barrels, I know some people paint the gun barrels silver. I like to leave mine black. I figure there's enough metallic on this thing already, and so the less metallic colors on it, I'd say the better. So gun barrels, arm joints, the cabling around the chest, all of that stuff. When it's done now, we get out the Dawnstone, and this time we want to be selective where we put the highlights. So, for example, when I apply it to the arms here, the arm joints, I'm going to do a very, very tiny highlight just to try and give it, I wouldn't quite say it's non-metallic metal, but just put that line in the middle and it makes it look like a shinier joint. So I'm not painting the whole length of where I painted the Eshin Gray. The Eshin Gray covered most of those raised edges, but the Dawnstone, I'm just putting more of a pinstripe, really tiny detail here. On the back legs, I'll do it a bit longer, just because of the way I think the light's going to hit it. I think it picks out the details a little better. But that's the way I'm doing it there. And then you'll see when I put Dawnstone on that joint there, you put it across the top of the upper, or the outer circle across the top, and then on the top of the inner circle on the bottom. So those are the two areas where it will catch. Alright, so here's the part where the video actually offers probably a new contribution. That's painting plasma. There's lots of plasma weapons in 40K, and so I wanted to find a nice, easy, but effective way to paint a good, glowing, strong plasma effect. So starting with Calidor Sky, you paint over all the coils, everything. So you can use this on the Telemon, you can use this on Guardsmen or Space Marines with their plasma weapons. Anything where it has those plasma coils. Pick a nice bold color for your base coat, and then get a really strong highlight, and then you're going to go white for the last level. You're going to paint on the first stage, you're going to dry brush the second, and then you're going to layer edge the third bit. And you can use this for any color. I've done purple plasma, I've done green, I've done yellow, I've done blue. I like blue. I think it looks best. That's personal preference. So the first step then is fully paint in the coils. Make sure you don't get any of this blue on the gold, because we'll want to save that for the dry brush layer to give it that glowing effect. But for now, block in a nice solid color of your base. And you probably have to go over it twice, maybe 3 times, depending on the thickness of the paint. Also, don't forget to put in a little bit of blue in the arm cannons over there, or flamers, or whatever you happen to equip it with. But you could do a different color if they're not plasma. I mean, you could do a yellow, although it might not show up on the gold very well. but make sure you get everything base color. Okay, Temple Guard Blue, we're gonna start dry brushing. And here, it's not just okay if it spills over, you want the dry brushing to spill over onto the black barrels and on the gold plating around the gun. This is what's going to give the plasma the effect that it's actually glowing. So do a fairly strong dry brush. Now fortunately the plasma coils on the Telemon are nice and sharp, and so you can push pretty hard without having to worry about covering up that darker blue. I know on some of the Guardsman plasma guns it doesn't work quite so well. But see, if you look now, you have this really nice effect that the blue is actually pulsating or glowing beneath. And it's a simple effect there. For our last step, we're going to use white scar. And here, very, very tiny highlight just on the very tops of the coils. So you can drag the brush down like that just to get a nice straight line. Kind of as your base. And then ever so slightly widen those points just a bit. If you put it on too much, the effect won't work. If something's very, very shiny and bright, it will have that point where the light kind of concentrates at the very, very tip. If you make that white area too big, it won't give the effect of shining or glowing. Instead, it'll look like your glowing is deciding whether it's a white glow or a blue glow. So very, very sparing highlight at the very, very tops of those coils. Now I know I said earlier that yellow on yellow gold doesn't show up, and it really doesn't, but when I was asked to paint this for someone, they said just like the box, and the box had yellow eyes. So there we go, we got yellow eyes. There's one other detail, there's a gem on the front of the armor, so you get a nice dark blue or a dark green, but something to contrast with the yellow. Dark blue on the front, and then a slightly lighter blue on the tip to give it that three-dimensional effect. And if you really want, you can even put a slight pinpoint of white in the top corner to really get across that this is a gem. It's very shiny, very translucent. But other than that, there's only one other step, and that's add a little bit of shade to the eyes, either with a yellow or a orange wash, just to give some depth and to help blend the yellow into the armor, set it apart just a little bit. And there you have it. Might not win you a golden demon, but it's good enough.